So for me, the piece that I'd love just to share one simple metaphor, really, a brief explanation of what I mean by being versus doing. A metaphor that I think wonderfully symbolizes where we should try and get to as individuals with regards to being versus doing. And then again, I just like to leave you with one question to reflect on over the weekend and beyond around the whole topic of being versus doing. So firstly, what do I mean? Or, when I hear the phrase being versus doing, I guess it's sometimes helpful to put context on it so we have a shared understanding. So for me, being on one side is the whole art of performing, producing, achieving. Um, if you want to use an adjective to describe how you are when you're, sorry, I hope I said doing. Did I say doing, Barry? Wait a sec. Did I? Did I?
No, you said being. So
Well,
I was going, oh my
I,
God, I'm going to say the opposite to
yeah,
John here.
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. When's he going to reverse engineer his way out of this one? So yeah, okay. Doing. I'm talking about doing here. This is why it's great to work in a pair, by the way. This is why it's so beautiful. I would have been down a path there and you would have probably slowly one by one have left the call. So Barry, thank you for having my back. So in terms of doing first, and maybe it's interesting, maybe that's a bit of a Freudian intervention that I've gone to, even though I wanted to do being, I've gone to doing, because I think a human instinct quite often means that we do doing a lot more than being. So for me, doing is all about, it's about like trying to be productive. It's trying to be achieving, producing. It's very much linked to success. If I was to use an adjective that would most commonly describe how we are in the art of doing, it's busy. And if I was to describe a focus that we tend to have when it comes to doing, it's an external focus. It's what can we do in the world? What can we achieve in the world? And I guess for me, that just kind of gives a bit of context on what I mean when we talk about doing. On the other side, then we've got being. So what is being? What do I mean when we talk about being? I refer to being as it's about like nourishing ourselves. It's about the act of relaxation and renewing ourselves. It's very much about the whole concept of taking time to reflect on how things are going. If I was to use an adjective or one word to associate with being, it's rest. I would say, in this moment, it's very restful and it's about rest. And then in terms of a focus for being, I would say it's very much an internal focus. So when we're in the art of being, we're really looking more inward in this state. So that's being versus doing. What's the metaphor that I think is very helpful? There's a number that I had in my mind during the week, and I'm just going to rest on and sit with one. And it's the whole concept of having a balanced scale. So for me, the ideal scenario, or the ideal, okay, not so much scenario, but metaphor to hold on to, is a balanced scale when it comes to being versus doing. Because as much as possible, when we're in an ideal state, we're accessing both. Okay, we're accessing doing to get things done, the personal goals, the ambitions, the vision we have. Okay, we're accessing doing to get the things we need to get done to achieve around that. On the other side, though, that requires energy, that requires activity, that requires an investment of yourself, okay, which depletes energy levels naturally. So this is where the other side of the scales, okay, if that's all we're doing over here and doing, then this is where being comes in. Because if I want to do that consistently, if I want to try and create kind of good performance levels and a good version of myself in doing, I have to rest. I have to renew. I have to reflect on how am I and what do I need. And this is where being is absolutely critical. So for me, in terms of a metaphor, when I'm well, I'm accessing both. Now, it's the reality of life is we'll never have them constantly like this. That's not the way I'm encouraging you to live life, because it's simply not possible. There's times where we're going to have to draw on this. So a bit more weight goes into the doing side. Okay. So because we just have to, because we're busy, there's just demands on us in our work or our personal life, and that's fine. And there may be a period where we're down here a little bit, and there's more weight on the doing. It's just then being mindful. And this is where, again, over the last 8 years, the work of Barry and others and learning from them has been key for me. It's being mindful and aware that, okay, at the moment I'm having to lean more on the doing side. I just need to be mindful that at some point I've got to come back over here. I've got to invest in myself and try and slowly at some point bring it back to an even scale. So that's the key metaphor that I think is really important to remember in terms of managing ourselves. In challenging times like we are, which is why Barry and I brought this together, but equally beyond COVID-19, it's just a very helpful metaphor to have. Feel free at any stage, Barry, to come in. My observation in society, and I don't know, Barry, maybe just to touch on what your view on this is, I think in society we've become we've leaned much more to doing. Like we've become a doing society. It's, you know, people will say it's the busiest they've ever been in work. That, you know, I'd ask people how they're getting on, how's work. And I mentioned last week in Ireland we've got a very nice leaning towards grand, but sometimes I can hear the adjectives such as, well, I'm flat out, or it's chaotic, I'm slammed. And these are all heavy doing phrases. And I think society, we've got very much doing driven. And the thing is, if we overweigh the doing side of the scales consistently, and we don't come over here to invest in the being, eventually that's when we place too much weight on one side, and that's where the scales can topple over. And how does that manifest itself in people and at times in myself? It's where you just get really depleted in energy, exhaustion, and the extreme is obviously burnout. So we're looking for the opposite of that. We're looking to maintain a healthy, balanced scales and to try and buck the trend almost that we've seen in society, to say that being is such a critical component of this. I don't know, Barry, what's your view in terms of what you've seen, you know, in terms of the work you do?
I'd be the same. I think people actually have a very difficult time understanding being. When you say being, that it just doesn't compute even.
Yeah.
It's that's why the experience is so important.
100%. Like, and I think maybe perhaps if you might like to articulate a bit about what your view on being is. The thing I would say about being is it's incredibly subjective. Like I mentioned Carol Pemberton and the whole area of resilience last week, and she's, you know, in the UK and a very prominent coach there. She says that one of the key areas of resilience, which for me, resilience metaphorically can allow the scales to stay balanced. So you can create this flexibility because you're drawing on both. One of the other areas I mentioned, network and connections was key last week, is one of the areas she talks about in resilience. One of the other areas she talks about is activities. What activities, she says, can help you to stay good and grounded in challenging times. And for me, it's thinking about, well, being is so subjective to each other, to ourselves. So what I need to do to invest in being for myself, for rest, renewal, for reflection, could be somewhat or significantly different than Barry's. And that's not to say Barry's is more right than mine. It's just to say that he's tapping into what works for him to get into that being state.
Yeah. Will I share something?
Please.
I'm teaching an MBS work course at the moment, and participant in it had this experience which kind of shows the difference between the two. So, and again, it is not that doing is wrong, but doing is fixated on the future. It's because right now isn't okay. I want something else, and this is where I want to go to. And it's, I think, the predominant mode. And this lady, every morning, she's a fit and healthy, and she always goes for this run. And she kind of has high level of self-awareness as well, and a little bit more now that she's practicing lots of mindfulness, and she's sort of bringing that into her day. And she noticed that every morning she'd do this run, and it was just getting to the end. The time was important. Was she improving her time? And oblivious really to to the journey. It's just, and it's a healthy thing to do, and it's good, and it's exercise, and I'm not criticizing that at all. But she had a different experience last week when she was running, and then she just sort of, it's not that she stopped, it's not that being becomes this like, I just sit there, but it's like she stopped looking with this laser focus with this goal up ahead, and things opened up, and her pace maybe slowed a little, and she described seeing a squirrel kind of running down a tree. She's kind of running around this really nice area, but she'd never really paid attention to it because she's just so fixated on doing the lap as quickly as possible. And she kind of saw this squirrel, and she kind of slowed down and observed this, and still running, and just, oh my God, that's like what I'm noticing the way it moved and the little details in nature that normally she misses. And the whole, she described it as feeling just joyous and completely different to how she normally would exercise. And it is just such a classic example of the doing versus the being mode. It's really about how you approach the thing, or your mindset. Is it something that I'm trying to rush through, or am I just here? Yeah.
Which is, I think, an incredibly important point. One, in terms of that you're being mindful in your being, and then two, in terms of, and this is the piece where I found mindfulness and you know, leaning on Barry's work huge, because I might do a 5-minute check-in in a day where I'm just in a heavy doing mode. However, probably not aware that I'm so much in doing mode. I might do a 5-minute check-in of a meditation. And by the end of the meditation, I realize that I'm exhausted. Like, I actually just realized by doing it, my God, I am running on empty here. And yet, perhaps without that 5-minute check-in, like, I might continue on in that mode and further call and deplete, like, and, you know, put more weight on this side. So not even, one, just to be mindful in the act of being, and two, just be mindful during the day to check in and to see perhaps what side of the scale do you need to draw on. There's a reactions button down on the right hand side, and I think there's an opportunity to put a thumbs up. So if this resonates with you, perhaps you can put up thumbs up. If it doesn't, then you don't need to. I have found that in my 38 years since the first lockdown in this country happened, my ability to invest in being has gone up, like, hugely, because I've been forced to slow down. Right. And I literally have found it one of the great blessings, because I now literally have everything in my day that I'd like to from this side at the moment. And I'm grateful for that, to come back to one of the episodes we did previously. So my question, you know, and there's a number of thumbs up there, is that I'd love you to do is reflect on, what can you take away from this time that you found helpful in terms of your ability to invest in being for yourself and rest, and what that looks like. What, before things start to ramp up, and they will, my wish and takeaway for you is to ask and answer the question for yourself: what do I really want to make sure I want to bring with me from COVID-19 that I've developed by way of a strategy around consistent investing in being? I'm going to leave the space to Barry. Barry encouraged me a few weeks ago to say what's in my head, heart, and gut as I'm doing this. There's been this kind of heat in my chest as an overwhelming desire to make sure I land impressive and important points, because it's the last episode. And, you know, there's a phrase, let it go. I need to let that go. I hope it's been helpful, because if it lands for one, then that'll be good enough. So Barry, over to you. Just for your thoughts.
Thanks, John. I appreciated listening to you there, and I wouldn't in my own mind have had the kind of balancing the scales as being the foremost thing, but it's really useful, because one thing about being in doing mode, and also this driven doing mode where I'm just forcing something which goes beyond doing, that's draining. And being mode is we're replenishing ourselves. So yeah, having a balance between the two, just important to re-emphasize that. And then I was thinking as well, it's what I said there in the middle when you asked me to come in, that people don't actually get what being is. It's foreign to them. And you can meditate and you can practice mindfulness and you can be in the driven doing mode. So you really know the difference between the two. Doing comes in, driven doing comes in when this moment right now isn't okay. I have a feeling that it's not enough, it's boring, or I need more, I'm not good enough, and I need to get somewhere else. And then that sort of feels a little bit unpleasant. When I hope maybe some of you resonate with that feeling. It feels unpleasant and I don't like it, and I go towards the future and what do I need to do and to get away from this? And then being is present, so it isn't fixated on the future. And even when you meditate, we might do a little practice. I think it might be the most useful thing. So when I come to sit and the bell rings, a lot of the time I'll come into contact with what's here. This moment will be, sounds that are here, traffic outside, what I notice internally, my mood. And then sensations, the body, all these things. And then this is the way it is. And then there'll be, and I prefer it to be like this. And there's the way I want it to be. And the bigger the gap between those two, the more tense I feel. It's like there's a wanting or a resisting, one or the other. And then the meditation or the mindfulness can often be about getting from here to here, which is actually you're just more doing. And it's the sounds so counterintuitive, but you just have to experience it. It is just about being with what's here as it is. And so we might just do a little practice. And one thing that I find helpful, and you can do this if you want, I know I'm in doing and driven doing when there is a feeling of rushing, like you said, John, where some tension, it feels contracted. And so it could even be just this, you could clench both your fists and just feel that sort of, there's some tension here. There's some tension here, and then there could be a sort of gradual softening. Just gradually let your hands unclench. Not all this wanting, not all this controlling. And we could just sit for a moment and we'll revisit practice we looked at, which was this pro practice, Gregory Kramer. And the P is just to pause. So sometimes life can be, it's like we're in a car speeding along and we're not really aware of the scenery or anything because it's going by so quickly. And then occasionally we stop the car and we get outside and we notice so much more. So we can pause, and that just brings us into contact with what's here. Might not always like what's here either, but it's here. There's this body sitting here. And there's the mood, the inner weather. and sounds. It's just that first step is pause. And then the or is the invitation to relax, if that's possible, or allow if relax isn't possible. Maybe it's possible to just invite the body to settle. Just knowing you're sitting here, there's some support underneath. Noticing that you're breathing. Pause and relax. And then the O is open. Open to everything that's here. This moment as it is. Maybe not having to have some agenda or control something, just allowing this moment. Sounds coming and going. Body breathing. Noticing that tendency sometimes we have to rush to the next moment. And you can open the eyes if you like, if they were closed. So maybe there's some little experience there of just being here and not having to be focused on what's next. One other tiny thing, if I have time, just to say that there can be, I think, a misconception that being is only about resting, and but it's also, I find this to be true. When I'm in doing mode and driven doing mode, it's like my perception is quite narrow. It can be almost like I'm looking through a straw and there's the thing up ahead that I want. And sometimes when I just remember to stop, it's like everything opens up. You can see a much bigger picture. It can be a really creative space. I know this Picasso's creative process was he'd consume information about whatever he was interested in, and then he'd have a bath. He'd just be in a bath, and then things would come. Or, Newton sitting there under an apple tree. He's not grasping or wanting, and then the thing falls, and he's like, "Oh yeah." So it's so useful. It's not something that's a waste of time, or if we're always in driven doing mode, it's so narrow, we don't see a big picture. So it's another reason to prioritize it a little. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Barry. As always, you bring awareness to the core of every topic in such a pertinent way. And just in that meditation, I could see myself being able to look back and see where I was in terms of doing versus being, so.
Yeah. Do you remember we had the session on the kind of compass as well, where we were talking about choice and how you can, I don't know if everyone is here, and we're like, oh yeah, that's the direction I want to go in. So in a way, that is the sort of the doing. It's like, okay, that's my choice, and this is where, and it's really helpful. But then if we don't enjoy the journey, it's yeah,
Yes, very true.
it's and almost a river is a good example too. Like if a river was in doing mode all the time, it would just be this straight line
Mm-hmm.
where it wouldn't even get to the ocean probably because it'd be stuck somewhere. But it just flows, and the same way uh, life does for us when it's at its best, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what this tells me is we've become like we've hit the buzzer in terms of time the last 2 weeks, and it's probably helpful to say why, in terms of what our plans are for beyond here. So we might wrap up the session. I hope you can say from Barry's side that just ability to check in and to be aware of where you are and sitting and being. Yeah, 100%. Very much agree with that. Some sort of badge of doing honor. An absolute pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. So look, so maybe you can, again, like these recordings will be there, maybe to sit in. I'm certainly going to sit in on that reflection again, because I just thought it was powerful, and also just to see what from being you want to take away from your time that that you've experienced in COVID-19, when you've maybe had more ability to sit with yourself. Barry, yes. Now we've got a question saying, does this continue? How would you like to tell the crew about our broad ideas? I'm going to be sending a mail on Monday about this, but even in 60 seconds.
Sure. Yeah.
If people have 60 seconds, apologies.
Sure. We are going to, we're finding it useful for ourselves and hope that we think that it will be useful for others. So we're going to kind of deepen this a little bit. We're going to have 4 sessions around awareness, around resourcing ourselves,
Yes.
about meeting challenges, and then living, yeah, taking it all forward. And the thing that we find we think might be missing from these sessions is there's the half hour where John and I are chatting, but the real gold is when people get to share their own experience. So we want to make it slightly longer, optional longer session, where there will be this half hour with a little bit of practice and some ideas, and then also another little half hour for us to be in groups and sort of learn from each other. And sometimes when you hear yourself saying something aloud, it's very different to just hearing a nice idea and going, oh yeah, that's nice. So is that a good summary, John?
Unbelievable. And given I put you on the spot, it's particularly unbelievable. So look, with that in mind, we would love, I mean, we're loving doing it. We'd love to see it. It'll be starting on 2 weeks time, so the 26th of June. So I'll send an email with the video later on, and just look for your permission to include you in an email on Monday about the details of what we call Rise. So we would like you to rise with Barry and myself for 4 weeks starting the 26th of June. It'll be half-day kickoff. So look, hopefully we see each other again. If we don't, it's been an absolute joy and pleasure to sit with you on Friday mornings. And that's really been a pleasure. So hopefully see you again soon. Barry.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I feel I've got to know all of you a little. So